Good afternoon, everybody. It looks like we still have a few people joining. I hope everyone had a great weekend. We wanted to welcome you to our general session of Women in Model Risk and Development. Jen and I are actually just returning from the ABA Risk and Compliance Conference that took place in Seattle last week. It was definitely for anybody who participated, and maybe some of you were there as well. It was a great forum of speakers across a multitude of key topics impacting the banking industry today. No real surprise, AI, generative AI, and even models were a hot topic. So in a future meeting, perhaps we can share some information from the panel that we participated on, as well as some other related sessions. Today, however, we are excited to have an exciting speaker who will walk us through the keys to making model risk management work for your organization. I'm going to turn the floor over to Sonia, and she'll kick us off.
Great. Thank you, Debbie. Well, I'm excited to introduce Hannah Glassrud. She'll be our presenter for today. And Hannah is a quantitative consultant with Darling Consulting Group. Hannah's work focuses on models, including model validations, model risk management, machine learning, and statistical modeling. And Hannah has worked with various models, including CECL, DFAST, capital, and credit loss model. She brings her experience and horizontal perspective to community banks and credit unions, where she assists them in developing and implementing model risk management programs. Hannah has earned her bachelor's degree in economics from Boston University and has also earned a Master of Science in Analytics from Georgia Tech. So she definitely has an impressive resume. I'm excited, and without further ado, I'll turn it over to Hannah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Sonia. All right, let me share. Can you see my screen? Perfect. All right, so today we're going to kind of walk through MRM from its inception to where it stands now, and for anybody who's unfamiliar, basic processes to get one set up at your institution. So in 2011, DFAST, CCAR kind of came into the picture, and with that came SR 11-7 from the Fed and OCC 11-12, and that's basically supervisory guidance around model risk management. It applied to the larger institutions, 10 billion plus, and it was designed to help institutions ensure that models operated in a safe, sound, and reliable manner. In 2017, the FDIC formally adopted this guidance. However, they didn't really apply it to anyone. It was technically applicable to institutions over $1 billion, but we really didn't see them enforcing it all that much. In 2021, the OCC updated their Comptroller's Handbook around model risk management. It's about 100 pages about their expectations around model risk management programs in OCC institutions. And finally, the FDIC followed suit in 2022, updating their manual to include review of model risk management programs. We have seen an uptick in expectations, particularly in the community banking and credit union space, regarding model risk management practices and things they should be doing. So through our conversations with some of my consulting clients, as well as other clients that we see at DCG in our validations, we have examiner insights, is what I like to call them, and they generally shout out to a lack of sufficient governance and lifecycle management, and that basically means you don't have a model risk management program, so you should set one up. And there's a lot more higher expectations around model risk management because rates are moving again. The world's getting more complex. Fraud is on the rise. There's a lot of heightened risk around the banking environment, and the models that we utilize are becoming increasingly more important. So we need to make sure that they're operating and functioning properly. With that, particularly with regards to fraud, BSA, AML, maybe even CECL, there's an increased reliance on third-party technologies and modeling software solutions. So while you can purchase a third party, you're still subject to model risk management guidance. And you, as the person owning that model, needs to understand what's required so that you can make sure you pick the proper vendor, somebody who understands model risk management and can make sure that these models are functioning properly, update and educate you so that you can use these models properly. And overall, just make sure everything is just wrapped up in a nice little bow. Controls and assumption management is probably one of the biggest things I've been hearing. There's a lot of complaints around lack of formal controls and lack of assumption support, particularly with interest rate risk models. So if you're seeing that this year, you're not alone. A lot of community institutions are getting hammered for this. So if you own maybe the IRR model, start getting a prepayment study in place to support prepayment rates or deposit study to support your betas. Ongoing performance monitoring is always an examiner hot topic. It just changes model year to year. Right now it's CECL. So make sure that you have a way to monitor its performance, whether it's benchmarking it against your peers, looking at maybe it's back testing it, things of that nature. Make sure you get that in place sooner rather than later. And effective challenge. So I personally hate this term. It's one of those industry terms, and it applies to literally everything from the inception of the model all the way to retirement. The way I like to think about effective challenge is it's going in and asking, well, why did you do that? What was the rationale for doing that? Is this built properly? Would I do something different? It's coming in with that sort of mindset and really asking the question, why? And evaluating something with like a objective eye. It separates out audit from model risk management. Auditors come in with their list, there's things to do. Model risk management is more geared towards kicking the tires and more towards evaluation, rather than just a checkbox exercise. So what's the benefits of doing this? Well, through model risk management reviews and all of that good stuff, you go in, you look at your models, and you look at the governance, you look at the controls, and you can note deficiencies. And when model owners start having better governance and controls around their model, it actually helps the model become better itself. Through validations, you can improve your models, whether it's the underlying structure or data set you're using, or any parameters might need a little tuning. So validations through a model risk management framework lead to better models, which then in turn, for those in management who may not use the models, it gives you better insight, which then you can use in strategy and decision-making or in fraud detection. But overall, having a good model risk management framework helps by making these models better, reliable, making them finer tuned, better performance, which leads to better insights and hopefully better management of your overall risk and strategy. So how does this thing get set up? Who's involved? There's this notion of the 3 lines of defense. So the first line is going to be model owners, people using the model, developing the model, managers of those folks. They're known first line. They're really responsible for the bulk of model risk management activities. And that's because they're in it day to day. They know these models the best out of anybody. And so they're the best ones to control the risks of these things. Then you have the second line. So these are your risk management experts. They're the ones implementing your model risk management framework. They react and interact with the first line through validations, through annual reviews, getting information related to the model inventory and risk rating. And together, they try to monitor, mitigate, and control risk that arises through each of the models. And then you have internal audit, which comes in and they actually audit the effectiveness of the program, as well as compare it to applicable guidance to make sure there's no notable gaps. So when you have all 3 of these working together in a nice way, you can create a really effective program that looks under all the different rocks to make sure that there's no unidentified risk or emerging risk that could, put you at a disadvantage. So right sizing your program. First, you need to consider how complex are you? Model risk management is always managed according to your complexity and your risk exposure. If you're a vanilla firm, not a lot of exposure, not a lot of models, your program's going to be a lot clean cut, smaller than maybe a program that has hundreds of models. The more models you have, the more complex it's going to be. You also need to consider your resources. So we all have budgets and we can only do so much in a year, and we only have so many people that can set up this program and implement it. So when you're designing your program, you need to consider those constraints, as well as the overall goal to kind of create the best, most optimal program for you that addresses all your risks, but doesn't break the bank. And finally, MRM as a culture, which basically you need it to be more of a carrot approach than a stick approach. If you get the first line on board, you get management on board, and everybody sees the benefit of doing this and doing it right, it makes creating your program so much easier. So it sounds silly, getting everybody's buy-in, but it is critical in implementing a model risk management program. So next is the MRM playbook. My colleague Mark actually came up with this. He's like, Hannah, if you had 5 steps only to create a model risk management program, how would you do it? Like, how do you jumpstart a program? And so we kind of came up with first, well, you need to know what a model is. So we need a definition. Then we need to know how many models we have, which is the inventory. We need a way to prioritize them. That's through risk rating. And we need a way to assess how frequently they get validated and the rigor that we're going to apply the program. And finally, we actually need the program itself, which lays out our expectations and standards. So let's start with the definition. So tool versus model, it's kind of the great debate. First, I like to separate them out looking at uncertainty. So tools are going to produce same output every day. Given this data, it's going to create this output. There's no uncertainty in that. Models are going to have uncertainty, and this can come in from the data itself, whether you're utilizing a lot of assumptions or forecasting, and it can come through the methodology. So think of your interest rate risk model. Cash flows are a very structured thing. There's no variation in the logic. What makes interest rate risk models is the assumptions. They are critical in an interest rate risk model. And that's where the uncertainty comes in, through your assumptions, through the scenarios you're running. Let's flip to maybe a loss model. Now, loss models are based on historical data and creating a relationship with macroeconomic variables to then forecast in the future. So that relationship is an estimation. It's not guaranteed to hold true in the future or to be the most accurate. It's just your best guess at a representation of the real world interaction. And so that's where uncertainty comes in and the methodology. Next, you need to look at the impact. So some things that appear to be tools on the surface can actually rise to the status of a model because of their impact to your institution. Biggest one we see is in, BSA AML. A lot of people argue that these are tools. They're logic-based. There's not a lot of complexity in some of the applications. Others use neural networks, which is definitely complex. But there are some that are just rules-based. The impact to the institution makes these rise to the model designation, because if they go wrong, they go very wrong for your institution, and it's a big impact. Tools, on the other hand, are used more as a convenience. It makes your life easier. If it goes away, it's not going to prevent you from doing your job. You just might have to do things a little bit more by hand. And finally, regulation. If a regulator comes in and says, this is a model, just accept it. They either know of some risk that's on the horizon or some regulation on the horizon. They know something, so just go with their designation. And complexity. Overall, tools are highly intuitive, not really complex. Models are usually more complex in nature. So that is model versus tool at a very high level.
Hey, Hannah, I'm sorry, we
Yeah.
do have a question and it may relate to the complexity, but how would you evaluate AI and machine learning when it comes to models?
Right. So machine learning, and I have some slides about that later, but machine learning, there's three broad categories. So there's supervised learning. And in that is things that we already do today, such as regression. So those are definitely models. There's classification and supervised learning that often is used in fraud. Those are definitely models. You have another classification called unsupervised learning, which is there's two ways. One is clustering, which basically groups like data points together, and the other is through data dimensionality and reduction, and that's like a pre-processing step. So those they are models in and of themselves, but they're more generally going to be used in combination with another method as like a data pre-processing. So I would still subject those to model risk management guidance. And then there's reinforcement learning, which is think of your Roomba. It learns to navigate your home and vacuum. That's reinforcement learning. I haven't seen that in banking yet, but if it does come down the line, it's 100% a model. So all machine learnings, whether it's supervised, unsupervised, or reinforcement, are going to be models. They're going to be subject to model risk management, albeit it may be a little bit different than what you have historically seen. Now, AI takes machine learning along with other things such as robotics, what's it called, computer vision, other very complex fields, and tries to, do human-like intelligence. So AI is on the rise, it's coming, and I'll get to it at the end, but it'll be subject to not only model risk management, but also compliance, legal, IT. Like it's going to be very complicated managing the risks of AI. So I think that's probably one of the new challenges in banking that we'll see over the next decade. Did that answer the question, hopefully?
Yes, thank you.
All right. So step 2, create an inventory. So to me, an inventory is like a dashboard of everything model risk management at a very high level in a table. To establish it, it's pretty common sense, but you first identify what processes are a model. Then you go and meet with the people who own these processes, and hopefully they know enough about their process to give you the information that then you use to fill out an inventory. It's very simple. The biggest challenge is making sure everybody knows all the data. Sometimes it's an iterative process to get all the information needed, but it's fairly straightforward. So what's in an inventory? I like to break it out into 3 broad categories. First, you need information related to the model itself so that you can understand where it's being used, what is it doing, who developed it, why do we have this thing? Then you need information related to dates to help you manage it. So when was it implemented? When was the last time this model was updated to incorporate new information? Things related to model validation activities. When was the last time this thing was validated? When was the last time it was reviewed? And when are you expected to do that again? And then finally, model risk management related fields. Risk rating, so what's the overall impact of this model to our institution? Are there any notable exceptions to the policy? Any notable findings from the validation? And things of that nature are generally tracked in your inventory. Again, it's a dashboard. It's key information you need to help manage model risk. So what's in an inventory as far as models go? In the orange box, we call it the big 4. You're pretty much guaranteed to have these models no matter how big or small you are. You're going to have interest rate risk, liquidity, BSA, AML, most likely a fraud model as well, and a CECL model. You may have a stress testing, credit scorecard, or fair lending. Those are usually the next gen of models we see. And then everything else on this slide could potentially be a model, either currently or in the future. Again, it depends on your size and your complexity and how heavily you like to use models over human processes. Ooh.
So Hannah, sorry, two questions. One is you touched upon the identification.
Mhm.
I've seen organizations where they send out like an annual kind of questionnaire or survey. Can you speak to maybe some other methods you've seen at clients or what seems to work best when it comes to identification? Because I think that's kind of like a pain point, can be a pain point.
Yeah. Yeah. So personally, I like to start off with a training. So
Mhm.
train everybody on what is a model, what is a tool. Then
Mhm.
I like to send out a questionnaire with like yes or no's to really break it down. I have seen, Google Forms. I've seen all sorts of basically questionnaires are pretty much used. If you're not going to use a questionnaire, then it's through conversation. And if you have a lot of folks at your institution, that's a lot of conversations. So generally, I see people leveraging questionnaires, Excel workbooks, things of that nature to get the information quickly. And if anything comes up uncertain, it just warrants a follow-up call. So
Mhm.
that's generally how I see it done.
Okay, thank you for that feedback.
No problem.
The second question, and I apologize to go back to the definition for a tool or a model. So you outline kind of 3 items to consider, right? 3 points.
Mhm.
Um, would you classify a model if it met any one of those, or does it meet like 2 or 3? How
Right.
many points?
So it's usually a combination of points. Obviously, uncertainty, if there's uncertainty in it, it almost always is a model. Um, and then impact to the institution are pretty much the 2 highest, and regulations third. Um, so if I had to weight it, I'd say uncertainty is the biggest one. Then impact to the institution is the second biggest driver. Also complexity should be kind of thrown in there too.
Mhm.
So yeah, model versus tool is really fun. And it's also more fun when you start differentiating tool versus like end user computing. It
Yes.
can get quite complex quite quickly. So I just try to stick to like bold topics when I do it. Um, and then if people get confused, go through more conversations because, everybody's a little different, I find. So hopefully that helped.
Yes. Thank you.
No problem. All right. Risk rating. So once you identify all your models, you need a way to classify them, basically bucket them and help you prioritize your model risk management activities. Because again, we all have resource limits. So risk rating helps you know where to put your focus. And once you have that, you can start scheduling things such as validation, reviews, getting them on the model risk management bandwagon, basically. I always prioritize if you're starting out, get your high risk models MRM compliant first, then moderate, and then low. Because almost always people are resource constrained, and I always just say focus on the high risk, and as time allows, do your moderate. So how do you do this? You can do a qualitative approach, which is like a definition based. This can be done through actual definitions of, we consider this high risk in a paragraph, or it can be done through a matrix, such as I'm showing you, that breaks out broad categories, kind of subjective guidance on where you would fall. Definition-based approaches generally require conversation between the first and second line to kind of hone it. And it's highly subjective. So if you utilize a definition-based approach, I recommend you document the final, obviously, risk rating, but the reasons how you got there based on your definition and why that model applies to that specific risk pool. On the other end is a purely quantitative approach, which will look at various components such as impact to your finances, the complexity. It can look at the regulatory application of it. It can also look at things such as governance and controls as like counter risk measures. and it'll weight it according to how you think it falls. So obviously, if it's financially impactful, it's going to be highly weighted. And then the others kind of fall. And you'll have basically thresholds to then say, all right, this is my quantitative score. Where does it fall based on the threshold? So anything below 1.5 is low risk, anything above 2.25 is high risk, anything in between is medium risk. It's very self-functioning. You can give it to the first line, they fill it out, get you a preliminary risk rating back. It's highly efficient, but tuning these things is very difficult without the horizontal perspective, because it does require a lot to determine the ideal weights and combinations, and also the final thresholds, what really is a low versus a high. Then rigor. So with every validation cycle, it's tied to a risk rating. So low risk, I've seen 3 years, I've seen 5 years, I've seen 7 years. It depends. When DFAS first came out, it was a 1, 2, 3 year schedule. But I've seen it go to a 1.35, 1.37 even. So however you want to implement it, I'd say go with that. Medium is going to be between low and high. And then high risk, I generally recommend you validate these things annually. There's a reason they're high risk, they're highly impactful. And you want to make sure somebody's going in there every year and reviewing what you're doing, reviewing the model, and making sure that everything is still compliant and good. But I have seen institutions try to go with every 2 years. I personally would never recommend that though. But to each their own. I'm very risk averse, but that's why I'm in risk management, I suppose. Then finally, there is the model risk management policy. This is the governing document that lays out your entire program. So you have a general summary, says what's this policy intended to do? What's the goal of it? Some versions of how you change the policy, the process around that. Then it'll go into the roles and responsibilities of all the committees involved, the role and responsibility of the board itself, and then any management committees, followed by, if you have a model risk management committee per se, the model risk manager, and then the first line folks, so the model owner, the model developer, the model user, and internal audit. The bulk of the document, though, is the standards and procedures, and oftentimes this can actually be broken out into a corresponding model risk management procedures document, which is an end-to-end how-to guide of model risk management. When I'm consulting with folks, I actually love it, and I always recommend it to break the two out. I love a high-level policy and then a very detailed procedures document with templates. I'm a very regimented person though, so that's a preference. You could just have a high-level policy. It's up to you. But regardless, you will need to cover things such as how you're going to handle the inventory, what information you're going to collect, how you will risk rate, how often, the validation frequency based on the risk rating, what's covered in the validation, documentation expectations, implementation, use, and development standards, ongoing performance monitoring, change control, general governance. Basically everything soup to nuts about your model is going to have a standards and corresponding procedures associated with it that you're expected to uphold as the first line folks and maybe the second line. And finally, there's the fourth section, which is you should have a way to handle exceptions, because with every rule, there's an exception, and have a way to handle any sort of breaches in performance, or maybe if people are not as kumbaya at your institution and there's a lot of butting heads, maybe you need a way for solving resolutions. You don't always have to have that, but I do recommend it if you're in a more of a hostile environment to have a resolution section and how that's formally done. So that's pretty much soup to nuts, the start of model risk management to creating a policy. If you are lost and you've never created one, or you want to know more about standards, I highly recommend the Comptroller's Handbook. It is very detailed. It is prescriptive based guidance, as opposed to maybe SR 11-7. and it can really help you out if you're in a rut. Recently, this is related, I guess, back to AI and machine learning. So in the semi-annual risk perspective from the OCC, they actually highlighted the importance of identifying, measuring, and monitoring the risks of AI. They actually do say that, oh, I don't know why that's on a timer, but it is, subject to supervisory risk management principles, and that your current model risk management framework should be able to handle them to make sure that they're operating safe and soundly. Again, machine learning, as I said before, can be broken out into 3 different components. Supervised learning is already here. We've been using it for over a decade in banking. Unsupervised learning has been used, not as readily, but it is definitely used. And then reinforcement learning may be coming. Hard to say. They're complicated systems, but they may be coming through vendor solutions. You never know. But they are all definitely still subject to the guidance. And the biggest thing about AI and machine learning is when it's used in compliance areas, you need to be very aware of any bias of those modeling practices. Well-known failure is in facial recognition software. There is an inherent bias in these models that does not, do as well for darker skinned individuals. If you have that in an underwriting model by chance, or anything, maybe even an HR model, you could be subject to fines for being biased. So if you're going to utilize these more complex software solutions or these more complex models, you have to be very aware of the potential for bias of those models, more so than a supervised learning method. And finally, when AI, you start using it, you need to not only consider model risk management, because AI does use models to help it make decisions, but also the legal and the IT infrastructure component, because these are complex systems, most likely going to be cloud-based, but they are highly complex, resource intensive. And yeah, that's kind of MRM in a nutshell. I know I covered a lot, so if there's any questions, please let me know.
Let's see. Let's turn the exam. Okay, so someone had a comment, Hannah here, and they're just saying they turned the exam booklet. So I'm imagining the OCC from the guidance into a self-assessment tool. Tool to see what elements we do or don't cover within the program. So it sounds like they kind of did a self-assessment kind of checklist against their program.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, sounds like a good approach.
Almost like an examination of yourself.
Right. Before audit comes in, right?
Right.
Okay, so someone else had a question around the rigor around purchase models. So I guess, rigor between internal created, developed models and purchased third-party models.
So the expectation around model risk management is the same for internally and externally developed models. The biggest thing is, I guess there's 2 types of externally developed models, right? You can go to Moody's or any of the big 4, really any model developer, and have them build you models in which you get the data back, you get your own documentation. And then if a validator comes in, they can sign an NDA and go through and really just do a full validation as if it were an internally built model. That's kind of the ideal of the third-party purchase things. More commonly, though, there are what are known as the black box. And there are testing that validators can do around black box models. A lot of it has to do with sensitivity testing, putting in data, making sure the output is reasonable. You can actually try to replicate the model on your own, or create a benchmark model. So there are still activities, albeit different than if it were an internally built model or, the ideal vendor solution. But it doesn't mean you're not subject to validation. And basically with those models, you have to have a lot more controls in place because it is a black box. How do you know it's right? So it's just a little bit different with vendors, but the idea and the notion of model risk management is still the same. I always say do the best you can. There's usually something you can do. So hopefully that answers it a little bit.
Yeah, you triggered a question for me, Hannah, because you mentioned benchmark models. And I always struggle with those because I feel like now that's adding another model to your inventory and another model you have to, maintain the governance and do validations. Is that typically what you see your clients if they have a separate benchmark model?
So I've only seen benchmarks of like purchase benchmarks. I haven't seen two like internal benchmarks. I mean, yeah, you'd have to be pretty large to have your own benchmark of a model in order to have the resources to do all the MRM requirements involved with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it could be like for CECL, for example. So my colleague Joe created an ongoing performance monitoring tool for some of our clients to use. And basically for his benchmark, he says, all right, let's look at your reserve. And then let's look at the national reserve level and the distribution of it. Where do you fall with regards to that? Okay, maybe you're on the low side, maybe you're on the high side. Let's look at the loan mix. Let's compare our loan mix to the national loan mix or to your peer loan mix or maybe your region. He does all of that. And does your loan mix justify a higher or lower reserve? Do you have maybe a riskier allocation, a riskier pool than the national average? And if you're not riskier in any meaningful way or any way you can identify compared to the national, and you're below the national reserve level significantly, that might indicate to me that there's something going on in your model. Like that benchmark result it's giving me a little bit of butterflies in my stomach. Like I'm getting a little nauseous. So you really want to look into that. If you're falling in line with it and everything's explaining itself, then okay, that's a good benchmark. It's a good gut check. So that's another way benchmarking can be used in a little less complex manner of gauging more results than maybe processes against each other.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you.
No problem.
Yeah, we have another question. First of all, they're starting off with a great presentation, some compliments. So thank you. But they are asking, let's see, do you see financial institutions MRM team utilize MRM tools or a platform to manage models?
So that's like an up and coming thing. So there are now model risk management platforms out there that help with things like model inventories and tracking your risk rating. And, it's almost like a project management software to help you stay on track. So you can utilize them. I've also seen effective model risk management programs at, DFAST institutions that just use Excel, and Microsoft Forms. So it's really an up to you on, do you do better with a more platform-based thing or are you okay managing it yourself? I think both work. It's just about being organized and timely and on top of things is pretty much the key to any successful MRM program.
Thank you.
No problem.
Like we have another question. Okay. Does it make sense to add effective challenge to the what to track dashboard? So I guess to the inventory. So effective challenge. So meaning, do we want to, and I guess this is going to Kathy who posed the question, what efforts are we taking to effectively challenge, or if that model has been effectively challenged?
Okay, so effective challenge occurs in a lot of different areas, and you should be documenting effective challenge as it occurs, whether it's challenging assumptions in a committee meeting or during development. But there are things on the inventory that are effective challenge related, such as validation schedules. So when was your last validation? What were the findings? What's the status of remediation on those findings? You can give high level on, is the documentation up to date? When was the last time the assumptions were updated? Like, you can break it down into specific items that, get looked at, get reviewed. When was the last time ongoing performance monitoring was done? What were the results? How often is it getting done? There's a lot of different things in effective challenge that can be tracked in an inventory if you want. And I recommend it because it's your MRM dashboard. So it's good to know when effective challenge is taking place and the results of that effective challenge. But it's not required for some of
makes
it
sense.
anyway.
So some of the data points that were contained on your slide would demonstrate effective challenge.
Yep.
Is that
Yep.
what
So
you're saying? Okay.
validation is one of the biggest effective
Mhm.
challenges there is.
Yeah.
But there's others that weren't on there. Again, performance monitoring.
Mhm.
Last time documentation was reviewed. If you utilize annual reviews as part of your model risk management framework, and an
Mhm.
annual review is in lieu of a validation that year, MRM goes through and it's checking everything soup to nuts, not in a validation way, more of what's the
Mhm.
results of your performance monitoring, where's your assumption support, show me evidence of your controls, things of that nature. So if you utilize those, that would be tracking effective challenge on your inventory. Yeah, so you
That's a good
can.
point.
Depends
Good
on how
point.
much data you want to track.
Good questions. Let's see. I don't see any others coming through. Anyone else have questions for Hannah?
I have a quick question. Hannah, have you seen any of your clients in 2024 or late 2023 who've had a regulatory exam where the regulators are already starting to ask about AI or Gen AI? I mean, the guidance is loose at this point, but I was just curious if you've had any experience.
I have not, and I'm not quite surprised because they still haven't wrapped their heads around it as like a group of, the regulators are still getting through. Because AI is an immense and complicated plate of spaghetti to really think through and try to regulate. So I haven't heard of anything related to AI yet. I have only seen it in the risk publications from the Fed, the OCC, and the FDIC. It is on their mind, but they haven't really had any action items related to it other than start thinking about it. Don't use it if you don't understand it sort of mentality of be cautious, more so than giving anybody MRAs or things of that nature.
Got it. Thank you so much.
No problem.
All right. Well, there's no other questions in the chat. So I think we can conclude, but appreciate your presentation, Hannah. Wonderful. And there was
Thank
a
you for having
question
me.
posed. Yes. There was a question posed, and there will be the slides and the presentation will be circulated via email as well, distributed for some folks had to jump off early. Let's see. Oops, we may have just gotten
FinTech.
Yes, you saw. Okay.
Yeah, so FinTech, they did just publish guidance on FinTech in January or February, along with there's new supervisory guidance on third-party risk management of relationships. So I would recommend you read that. It does closely align with model risk management, sprinkling in vendor management. So it's kind of like a hybrid if you want a quick overview of the guidance, in my opinion. It is good. Basically, just do your due diligence when you're using these companies and make sure that they have model risk management programs in place because they are using models. So that's what I would say about FinTech in a nutshell, because that's a great topic.
Looks like another more just comment came through. The FDIC is starting to ask about acceptable use policies on Gen AI, which
Okay.
I've seen.
It's good to know. Well, hopefully no MRAs yet. That would be sad.
All right. Great. Thank you, Hannah.
Oh, thank you very much.
Oh, I think you're on mute. Kathy.
Hello. Hey, Heather, thank you so much for your presentation. It really was fascinating and very helpful. And of course, my dogs have just now started barking, so I apologize if you can hear that. But I wanted to make a couple of announcements. The first is if you have a certification, ABA offers several different certifications. But if you have one of those ABA certifications and you work for an ABA member bank, so not everything that we do requires ABA member bank requirements, but this is one of those. But if you work for an ABA member bank, then we would love to see you on a working group. And the ones that they are specifically looking for is the CISP, which is the Certified IRA Services Professional, and CERP, Certified Enterprise Risk Professional. So I'm going to drop in chat who you can reach out to if you would like to participate on the working group. And again, you need to have the certification and you need to work for an ABA member bank. The other couple of announcements I want to make is our next meeting is going to be on August 12th, and I'm going to drop a link to register in the chat. As many of you know, Corey Holland is no longer with the ABA, and he was managing and so we need to go to a new set of links that I will begin to manage. And so those older links that you may have registered with are no longer going to be effective. So if you would please grab that link that I just dropped into the chat and register for our August meeting. And we'll include this in the executive summary when we send it out. And then the last thing I want to tell you about a couple of upcoming opportunities that I will also drop into chat. The first is tomorrow, the Black Bankers ERG, they're hosting what I think is going to be a really interesting program. There's a gentleman named Timothy Todd. He's the historian for the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City. I didn't even know the Federal Reserve had historians, but they do. And he's written several books about the history of Black banks. And so he's going to talk on that topic tomorrow at 3 o'clock. Free registration. You don't have to be a part of a member bank. We'd love to see you for this important discussion. And then the other is next week will be our next DEI open forum. And here we invite folks from lots of different banks who may have interest in talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. The speaker will be Ken Daly of Atlantic Union Bank, and he runs his bank's Black Banker ERG. So it's a bank-specific ERG, and he's going to talk about some of the activities that they're doing, which may give you some ideas for your own banks. And we will also have a presentation by our AAPI ERG, and they're going to talk a little bit about their upcoming event in August. So if anybody has any questions about any of those, please let me know. And Michelle, are you telling me that one of my links is incorrect? I'm going to click here on my 812 link and it's showing 813. So my apologies. It is on 813. Does that seem right, Debbie? Or do I need to just change that altogether?
Let me take a quick look, Kathy.
Okay. Sorry, everybody. 813 is a Tuesday.
Yeah, I think it's supposed to be the 12th, Kathy, at 3 p.m.
Well, I think that's our leadership team.
Oh, that's true. You are correct. It is the 13th. I apologize.
Yeah, so I think we're okay. I think I just have a typo there. Michelle, I think the event, so everybody, it is on the 13th. The registration link is accurate. I just typed it in incorrectly here. So would love to see you on the 13th at 3.
And Kathy, could you resend the link for the August meeting? It didn't come through for me. I thought it was just operator error on my end, but it looks like somebody else had the same comment.
Yep, I'm opening it up now so that it's not just a click. Well, that didn't work. Let's see here. Okay, it's not letting me do it. It keeps I'm going to click it like that. That's the best I can do. But when I send out the notes from today, I'll include the entire link so that if this isn't working, you can still register.
Yep, that second link worked for me, so thank you.
Oh, perfect. Okay, thanks.
Great. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, everybody who joined us today. We look forward to seeing you again in August. And as we've said, you know, please feel free to reach out at any point in time. If you have an idea, if you want to present to this group, or you have any thoughts on topics that you'd like to see us cover. So we are always open to ideas, both on the, you know, the model risk management side, as well as just the general banking and development side. So thank you again, and we'll see you all soon.